off this discussion by putting into context what the biotechnology space has achieved in India. And let's get an external view on this from Kiran to start off with. Kiran, we've seen a fair bit of growth in India in biotechnology, and I think people like Kiran, who have been torchbearers in the sector, have done a lot to do that. But it has also been part of a global milieu where there have been a lot of changes, and we've been witness to those changes. How do you place India in the global sweepstakes when it comes to biotechnology? Let's start off with that.
Well, we do tend to think of the entire industry as a global industry, so we don't, when we think about it, think there's just an Indian biotech or a Japanese biotech. Or the great companies in our industry are global companies, and they do first-in-class molecules, best-in-class molecules. I think, Biocon just had a first-in-class molecule approved here, and we would expect it eventually to become a globally available drug as it is developed around the world.
I think seamlessness of the biotechnology industry is a good point to start off with, Kiran. Thanks for that, because at the end of the day, you are part of a much larger movement towards biotechnology because of the fact that the global pharmaceutical industry is shifting and focusing increasingly over here. Now, there are a lot of advantages that India has, a lot of challenges that India faces. As somebody who's been the torchbearer, as I said, for the industry, where do you see us at this point?
Let me respond to that by saying there are two ways you can answer that question. One is, of course, that yes, India and Indian biotechnology has come of age, because over the last decade or so, we have seen Indian biotech beginning to gain critical mass. We are beginning to see large businesses evolve, and we are seeing businesses that are addressing global opportunities. But when you talk about seamless integration, which I think is a very important point that Kiran has raised, sure, that this is a global biotech industry. And I, for one, am a big proponent of this East-West partnership, where I really believe that the challenges of today, whether it is global healthcare, whether it is environmental issues, whether it is energy, or whether it is food, I think we do need to leverage each other's strengths and capabilities. And I think that's where India has to be very, very clearly positioned to assess and leverage its strengths.
Tani, you represent both worlds, actually. You represent the big pharma from a Western perspective in a market like India. How would you place things over here? And for Novartis itself, I mean, what is the big opportunity being here?
So, this whole ask about India wanting to become a preferred biotech hub. India, of course, is a society in transition. You have poverty at one end and extreme wealth at the other. You have, subsistence farming with increasing IT and telecommunication. So is it in pharmaceutical industry and biotech as well. You've got these pockets of excellence. On the other hand, you've got huge challenges in infrastructure. And I think for biotech to really flower, you need an ecosystem and environment which really encourages this. And as we've seen, clusters of biotech which exist within the Bay Area or in Boston, this whole collaborative joy which comes in that area, we have to create that much more here in India. And the opportunity is tremendous. On one hand, we have, as I said, this illiteracy, but we have also the highest number of PhDs in India. So it's a grand opportunity, and I think the torch bearers, some of them sitting right here on the panel, can vouch for the fact that given a chance, this industry can really flower. But I would agree the fact that this seamless transition, we still have some way to go on that, because we really need the infrastructure and environment, the regulatory environment, the HRD policies, the research in universities, a bit more than what we have today. So we have some way to go before we get there.
In fact, we will touch upon each one of those points. David, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think before we go to the internal issues, I think we're not done with the collaboration issues. the crowd that Kiran and I tend to see as we travel around the world. You have tremendous skills, emerging companies, remarkably interesting technology, but it's still invisible outside, in these networks. So one of the examples is the Asian Cancer Network, right? So we've just been in Japan for a week. Interesting similarity for Japan is we don't see many Japanese pharma companies, groups of people forming those collaborations, but we also don't see Indians to speak of, except for Kiran mostly, being involved in traveling with the groups of people who are creating all these new kinds of collaborations and these new kinds of experiments. And I think that's what one of our messages was. You need to be visible as the experiments are going on, not before they're over, because you want to frame how they go. Kiran is constantly looking for ways of shaping the conversation, but she needs more people to do it.
40% of Indian biotech comes from this city.
And from Hyderabad.
But my question is, has that translation where venture capital, was able to spot trends and bet on the right kind of people, the right kind of entrepreneurs happened over here? Because in every sector, and that happens even in the product side in IT, people say that the VCs have not been able to keep, we don't have the depth of venture capital who can actually pick on technologies and back them.
Well, I'll say that in the IT sector, you've seen a lot of VC capital going into that. Because I think the IT sector is far more, mature and of a much bigger scale. And I think access to capital markets has driven that VC flow. In the biotech sector, it hasn't. Because apart from us, how many biotech companies have gone to the market?
Sure.
I can't think of any. And that's been the real problem. Most of these biotech companies have remained stunted, remained very small, and not been able to go to the market because our whole market dynamics and the policies that have driven this whole innovation space are falling behind. And that's another comment I wanted to make, Minnie, which is that if you want India to be a true global biotech hub, you must have policies and regulation that enable business. Today, it's deterring business growth. That is really our biggest challenge. You cannot have regulation that is ad hoc and that is driven by activism and NGOs. Okay?
Sure.
You cannot have suddenly a regulator saying, I'm going to declare a moratorium on clinical trials because there's this huge concern about the ethics of clinical trials. You've got to have a regulator who's able to address the issue with how the rest of the world has done it.
Sure.
You cannot have a regulator that says, I will not approve any more genetically modified crops because of NGOs. So this is the problem. You cannot have regulation being dictated by non-regulators.
What has also happened over the last couple of years is that a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies have stopped really spending on research, R&D. And a lot of that movement has happened to mainstream pharma in India. If you talk to some of the biggest companies like Nicholas or Glenmark, etc., do you see the fact that there is a lesser focus on R&D, meaning more money goes into incubating?
Mark Fishman might object.
No, people talk of the patent cliff. There is an R&D cliff out here as well.
Sure.
But it is true. I mean, some big pharma have reduced their R&D budget, but I can speak for Novartis. That certainly hasn't reduced. And in fact, if anything, we are going to make more productivity savings and put that money in addition to what we have in the R&D, because R&D is the lifeblood of pharma. And unless this model changes completely, that much money will be spent because there's such a high degree of failure. I mean, you may call it inefficiency, some people would call that, but the fact is, it is a high degree of failure there. And it's getting more and more tougher to get new chemical entities out. But again, here I come to the fact that small biotech, small companies can partner with big companies, be more nimble-footed, and I think that is a model where it's moving in that direction to get more bang for the buck.
And I don't think you should always equate reducing budgets with being able to do less. There was a lot of fat in these budgets.
Sure.
And I think if you look at pharmaceutical company pipelines, you see they've been cleaned up. There's a lot of Me Too products are gone from those pipelines. So if some of the R&D money went away, some of it went away from that stuff that was no longer what payers were going to buy.
It was shake out, right?
Yeah.
It
But
is
in
interesting.
addition to that, I also want to add by saying that the efficiency required in R&D has also benefited the research services companies in India and China. For instance, a lot of research has come here because there's a lot of externalization of research that has benefited companies here in India. I know we are, Syngene is certainly one of the beneficiaries of this because we really actively engage with a lot of the MNCs to do a lot of their important research in India. But again, it's not about just the cost arbitrage. If you cannot deliver value, then no one's going to externalize their research.
In 2009, David, there was a lot of talk about how venture capitalist funds had completely shrunk or had stopped giving out money, especially in the biotechnology space. Has that trend changed? Has that reversed?
We have seen no change in the level of venture rounds globally in aggregate since 2003. It's been $5.5 to $6.5 billion steadily. Now there's several questions about that. One is are our numbers a lagging indicator, and that we won't know, but the numbers, it actually was up last year. There is one thing going on in there is that there are fewer traditional venture capitalists investing that money, which means they're more strategic VCs engaged in these rounds, and it's hard to disaggregate the syndicates to know how much that is, but the numbers could be as much as a third now of the total VC pot being made up by strategic investors. But the money is still there, and if we look at the companies that we're tracking that are new companies, boy, they're really exciting companies. And if you go back to when we were starting, or even before BioCentury was starting, when there was like 4 or 5 real gatekeeper VCs, and there weren't, at one point we had in our database at the height of the bubble something like 700 entities in the world that called themselves life science VCs. Now clearly most of them weren't very good. So the fact that they go away is, like, from our point of view, irrelevant. What's really relevant is whether the good ones who have success, get exits, recycle the money back into the industry. That is the key point, is that they keep that going.
Okay. In India too, there's a biotechnology angel network that has been put in place. I mean, will that answer a lot of these issues, especially at the entrepreneur level?
Well, we need a lot more capital than we have now. We are under-resourced in terms of capital. I think the government is doing its bit because there are a number of funding schemes, incubation funds and innovation funds. But I think we are still not seeing serious venture funding. But having said that, I think we are also beginning to see some strategic investors as well, which is good news. And most of the other funding is angel funding. So I think it's a growing space, and I think the next 5 years, depending on how this industry grows, because again, investors are not going to invest in something where they don't have some certainty or predictability in terms of where this business is heading.
Karen?
I agree with everything that's been said, so I don't want to repeat it. And I think all of us up here are optimists. You cannot be in this industry if you're not an optimist. So I think what I would add is quality and innovation. I mean, when I think about India, there's about 15 companies that I think of that are really high quality companies. They're known globally and highly respected. And I think that you can tell that there's going to be more. So I'm pretty optimistic.
David?
I believe the $100 billion figure is a good goal. I think it's achievable. I think what it needs is some measurable milestones before that. I think that's the one thing where we know that India has tremendous enthusiasm The enthusiasm we saw here 10 or 11 years ago still remains. The sophistication is higher. The skill levels are higher. Still, you have to produce, right? You have to have accomplishments. So I'd say the $100 billion is a good one, but you need to sit down and work out with the stakeholders some really measurable milestones to get there.
Right.
You know, if the milestone's 15 years, whoever started it won't be there to finish it. So you need these.
So you have a window of 12 years to achieve that 100 billion mark, and that's a lovely point to end the discussion and start the next, because you're looking at ways of making it into that $100 billion mark. It's an ambitious target, but it will also mean a huge amount of innovation, creation of wealth, and the flowering of this industry, which it has been waiting for a long time. The last panel made a very interesting point that if we have to grow through collaboration, and I think Pfizer is doing a lot of work and is setting the stage for collaboration. You've been talking to many companies, so let's start off with that. What will make India a $100 billion market or industry by 2025?
Pfizer is a global leader in pharmaceutical industry, and the message is clear. They won't be able to discover drug by themselves. It's beyond doubt they have to have collaboration, and that would be the only way they'll be able to accelerate drug discovery and bring the medicines to patients quickly. With that in mind, Pfizer has been looking outside for collaboration everywhere globally. So in addition to their internal drug discovery programs, they set up this external R&D, which I am part of, and I operate out of India, looking for opportunities for Pfizer, for partnering with various companies, and then take the molecules into clinical trials and everything else. Similar thing is happening in academic collaborations too, not only in the US but Europe and other places, including India. I'm looking at opportunities to see how quickly we can bring the drugs to the patients, and that can happen only by means of collaboration, instead of saying we want to do everything within Pfizer walls. I think those days are gone for sure.
Anil, you've also been part of Quintulis, watching the industry transform, and you've also had to transform your focus accordingly. Where do you see us right now, and what will it take for the industry to reach that 100 billion mark?
That's right. When we started in 1997, 15 years back, the intent was to see if we can actually do good quality pharmaceutical research in India. And I think we had great success, and we've seen this sector growing at 20% plus CAGR. If you're looking at $100 billion as an aspirational target, that's the kind of momentum that we need to maintain over a period of the next decade. And we are very confident about the trajectory that we are in and this sector is in. But over the last 15 years, I think there is a very interesting thing that happened in terms of composition of our subsegment. When we started, going back to even 5-10 years, majority of our revenues actually came from the conduct of clinical trials. Today it has dropped down to almost 1/5 of our revenue, and 80% of our revenue now comes from data services, analysis of biomarkers and biosignals, and that's the change in services that we see, and that's the change in focus that we need to see. And I think there's a lot of interesting local and global enterprises here, and I'm very confident about the trajectory.
Deepanita, you run the IKP Park, and a lot of people have spoken about the fact that you need to create a universe which can allow innovation, which can allow companies to do their R&D work and build up scale simultaneously. You've incubated a lot of companies in the IKP Park. What are the learnings over there, and can that be replicated to create a far bigger enterprise?
Yeah, actually, we started with mid-sized companies, and then we went for the full spectrum, very small companies, startup companies, as well as large companies as large as DuPont in Ag Biotech or US Pharmacopoeia. US Pharmacopoeia is for the first time setting up a full-fledged biologics laboratory at IKP. So it's not that they don't have it even in Washington, D.C., what they want to set up. So everybody is very optimistic, at least in my IKP world. I find DuPont has 600 scientists working there. So the learnings is you need to set up new kinds of institutions, more collaborative institutions, PPP kind of institutions where research, innovation would flourish, policy institutions. We're actually planning a couple of them at IKP, and have a whole an ecosystem and an environment where a lot of networking happens. And I'm looking at various models of structured networking and mentorship.
Sudhir, let me come to you. In AstraZeneca, there has been an increasing focus towards the Asia-Pacific region and India. Tell me, where do you see things standing in the biotechnology space, and how do we reach that magic figure of 100 billion? And how would AstraZeneca see itself in that space?
Yeah, the journey of AstraZeneca in India started several years ago. It's almost been about 25 years since AstraZeneca started in India. Sadly enough, I think while we have made progress, and yes, we do have a molecule in phase 2, I still think that much of the development that's happening is unstructured. We made a great start, by starting R&D in the biological space. Unfortunately, if you look right now, the situation does not look very promising. I think 100 billion is not such a big amount for a country like India. It will reach that amount sooner or later.
Kiran, the fact is that I think everybody's spoken about different aspects of building that scale up to 100 billion. But Biocon was one of the early successes and one of the torchbearers in this space. We've not seen as many Biocons emerge as was expected. So how are we going to do that? And in the current situation, what needs to be done to really push the envelope?
So if you look at the story thus far, you're right. I mean, we were the only biotech company that IPO'd, and we should have seen more companies accessing the capital markets, but we haven't. Why? Because some of them have reached some scale. There has been acquisition in some cases. For instance, Shanta Biotech was acquired by Sanofi. Serum is very large, but it continues to remain private. And then you've got other companies who, some of them have reached scale and size, others haven't. I think what we have seen very clearly is that a lot of companies in the biotech space have remained stunted or not been able to grow in scale because largely they have been under-resourced in terms of capital.
Sure.
We are a very capital-intensive industry, and I think there has been suboptimal capitalizing of the business. So I think that is what has not allowed us to reach a certain size and scale. Now, having said that, there are other, why am I optimistic about 100 billion? Well, of course, Chandru said that he'd like to look at it as a 100 billion market cap, but I really believe we should set ourselves that goal of 100 billion in terms of revenues.
Okay.
And why do I feel optimistic? Because as I said, if you just break it up, and I think there needs to be granularity. I think David mentioned that it's all very well to say you're going to be 100 billion, but you better know how you're going to get there. What are your growth drivers? How are you going to reach these numbers? Sure. I think you have to have a roadmap which is very clear.
But I think what is interesting is the fact that the consensus was there needs to be a structure. The path is there, the target is there. There needs to be a easy way to get to it rather than the pain that goes with entrepreneurship in India and creating any industry. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you.